I'm Rhonda and welcome back to my studio. Today I have a guest artist with me and she is going to teach you about drawing portraits in pencil. And so I'm going to have a little discussion with her and introduce her to you, and then we are going to take a look at a portrait that she's drawn and she is going to walk you through her process. So this is my fellow artist, Laura Stock. She specializes in pencil portraits, and she does commissions for people. And so Laura, could you just tell me a little bit about what got you into portraits and why you like to work in graphite?
So the first time I learned how to draw portraits, I was in high school. And my high school art teacher, Mrs. Lewis, walked us through the basics of drawing portraits. And from that point on, I loved it. A lot of people don't really like drawing portraits because it can be very difficult to actually get it to look human and to get the shading and everything proper, but I found the challenge to be exciting. So I've chosen graphite for my main portraiture medium because I find I have a lot more leniency with it. If I were to do pastels or charcoal, it's hard to remove it from the paper if I should make a mistake. So by doing graphite, I can just erase and redo the portrait without worrying about leaving traces of the mistake behind.
What is the biggest tip that you would give to beginners when they are learning to draw portraits?
Okay, so for advice for beginners just starting out with portraits, draw the shadows, do not draw lines. So I will explain it more in the actual video, but you want to shade in shadows. You don't want to leave lines because there are no lines, actual definite lines on the human body other than like shirt sleeves where they end and that sort of thing, or the neckline of a shirt. Those are the only definitive lines. But even then, it's not, you wouldn't just draw a straight line, you'd shade in to give the appearance of a shirt that's sitting on top of the skin. So that would be my biggest one, and measurements. Take your measurements, don't deviate from your measurements. Your measurements are very important. You can trace the jawline. That is not cheating. And yeah, have fun. Let yourself make mistakes and practice.
So now can you tell us a little bit about the portrait that you've done there and who it is and what we're going to be learning?
So the portrait we are drawing today is Jungkook. He is one of the 7 members of the K-pop group BTS. BTS are some of my favorite people to draw, just because I am a huge fan. So why don't you follow me down to the table and we will get started. So I'm going to go through with you what tools I'm using. So first of all, I'm using the 5H pencil. I'm also going to be using my 3H pencil, my 2H, and if you guys have different preferences for pencils, feel free to use whichever pencils you like. I use my HB, and last but not least, I use my 2B pencil. Moving on, I have a white gel pen that I use to mark down my measurements on my ruler. And I have 3 sizes of blending
sticks that I will use. I have my micro eraser, my gum eraser, my paintbrush for brushing away any eraser shards, my mat so that I don't rub my hand on my drawing, my ruler, and then I also have my pencil sharpener, and make sure that your pencils are sharpened. So starting out, I use my 2H pencil to start with my measurements. So for the measurements, you want to go down the center of the face, following directly through the septum and between the eyebrows in the same direction as the person's head is tilted. When you draw your measurement lines for the eyes, you go from the outside corner of the eye to the outside corner of the opposite eye. For the nose, you go right under the septum. And for the mouth, you go right at the bottom of the upper lip. Now I will also draw in my jawline, my neckline, and I will draw in the peak of the hairline in order to give myself that guideline and not have to just try to guess as to how long their neck is and how high their forehead is. Following that, I draw in my marker lines, and that is at the corners of the eyes, the top of the eye at the highest point, and the bottom of the eye at the lowest point, but with Jungkook, because he's smiling, the bottom of his eye actually is right in line with my guideline. For the nose, I do the two furthest outside lines. And then the mouth is corner of the mouth to corner of the mouth, the top of the upper lip, the bottom of the upper lip, top of the bottom lip, and the bottom of the upper lip. So at this point I get out my light board. Not everyone has a light board, so another option is to use a window with a light behind it, or in the daytime you can see through with the sunlight quite nicely. And I'm just going to place my magnets to hold my paper in place. And with my ruler, I'm going to transfer my guidelines to my paper, my drawing paper, as well as my jawline, my necklines, and the peak of my hair. Now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to take my gel pen and I'm going to measure, or I'm going to mark out where my guidelines are for my eyes, for the width of the eyes. So I start at my farthest line, that's where the 0 on the ruler is, and I make marks where my other lines are, and I mark where my central line is, and I put a dot under that so that I know that that is my central line, and I know where to set the ruler on my drawing paper. From there, I use my 5H pencil so that I have very light lines which are going to be easy to erase. And I take my ruler, lining up the dotted tick with the center line, and I mark out where I had my guidelines marked on my ruler. And then I do the same with the top and bottom of the eye. Now for starting to draw the eyes, you need to draw the shadows. So what I'll do most often is I'll give myself a light outlining of the shape of this specific person's eye. Need to pay attention to the details as to the shape of the eye and where it goes up where he's smiling, as well as the structure of the eye and the specific details of where his pupil sits within the eye, so that you don't get what is called Google eyes, where his eyes are looking off in two different directions. From here, I start my shading process. So the inside corners of the eyes, there is always shadow. There are no pure white areas on the human face. Even with the eyes, you will see shadows everywhere once you start actually looking for the shadows. Now here, since he does have hair covering his eye, I'm going to just draw in where his hair is going to sit, and that way I don't shade in that part of his eye until I actually do the hair. So I'm blending with my pencil here, because as it goes in towards the pupil and the iris, it lightens up because the eye is a round structure. When I do the pupil and the iris, the pupil is always a solid color, colored in darkly. And with the iris, I start in the center and I make lines outwards towards the outside of the iris, and I fill it in so that it does look more solid and you can't see each individual line specifically, but it gives it a more natural look to have it not just one solid colored in shape. That way you give the eye a lot more texture. Make sure you keep the contrast with your shading, and once you're happy with the first eye, you can move on to the second. Never feel that you can't go back to the first eye should you want to change details on it. Biggest thing is to see the shadows and to take your time. Don't be in a hurry to get your drawing done. Normally a pencil portrait like this will take me upwards of 4 hours to complete in one sitting. Once again, because he has hair covering this eye, I will line in the hair so that I know where it sits over his eye so that I can shade in and color the eye around the hair. If you have to erase and you end up with eraser shards on your paper, don't wipe it with your hand. That will smudge your drawing. Make sure you have your brush there to brush the pencil shards or the eraser shards off. And I like using a blending stump because that gives a much more natural feel to the blending process. Now I'm comparing, and I'm pretty darn happy with how it looks. I am going to go back and do a few touch-ups. When doing the eyes, make sure you don't do them too dark. You don't want them to completely overpower the rest of the shading in your drawing. That's one thing that I did as a beginner, was the eyes were always much darker than the rest of the face. So here now I'm doing my measurements again, this time with the nose. My second measurement is measuring how far above the septum the nostrils are. So my first step for the nose is just drawing that really light outline of how the nose sits on the face. And from there, I go on to the shading. And I start with the nostrils, because the nostrils are the darkest part. as always, look for the shadows. Don't look for specific lines. By looking at and drawing the shadows rather than specific lines, you are giving the human face depth and movement. I'm shading under his eye because that's, as he's smiling, he has skin that bunches up under his eyes. The bridge and center part of the nose is always lighter, since that is the highest point. Quick comparison, and I find that my shading was a little too dark where the light is supposed to hit his nose. So I take my gum eraser and I just dab some of that pencil off of the page. Later, once I've completed more of the shading on his face, I might add some of that shadow back in, but for now I found it was just too dark. Here you can see I'm erasing my guidelines from his eyes and his nose and down the center, but I am still leaving the guidelines for his mouth because we haven't measured out his mouth yet, which is what we are going to do right now. So once again, do it the same way as you've done before. Marking out the center line and putting a dot so that you know that's where that spot sits on your drawing. Now you'll see here I'm giving myself my general outline of my mouth. But that outline will disappear as I shade and give the face depth. So now comes the teeth, and a lot of people have trouble drawing teeth. They find that the teeth end up looking, well, basically scary. So my advice is do not outline every tooth. You need to see the shadows of the mouth. Not all teeth are perfect, so you need to shade in the gums. And then as you're drawing the teeth, you just put little ticks up where the tooth around the bottom, visually your eyes fill in that full line. You don't need to draw in every single line boldly when you're doing teeth. And the little gaps between the teeth at the bottom of the tooth are always darker than the lines going up the teeth towards the gums. Make sure you count how many teeth are on each side, and your center line down the face should have been pretty close to between the two front teeth. Make note of the shapes of the teeth, because eye teeth have a very distinctive shape to them. But as you can see here, I'm not drawing in every single tooth. But because the gums are a different color from the teeth, the gums need to be shaded in if they're showing in the smile. I'm using my blending stick for the gums, because where the gums come down between the teeth, that's usually darker shading than where it crosses in front of the tooth, since teeth are rounded at the front normally. Now, I was unhappy with the size of his teeth. Jungkook has quite a bit larger teeth, and I had drawn them smaller, especially his two front teeth. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's what erasers are for. And what I did was I just erased, and I added more size to his teeth. When you're drawing your lines between the teeth, make sure they're up and down properly, because if they are on a slant, it's going to look like his teeth are very crooked. So here now you see I made his teeth a little longer. I made his front two teeth a little larger. And now I'm shading in his bottom teeth because he is showing them when he smiles too. And the best way that you can do that so that it differentiates from the top teeth is make sure you have the shadows. Because his bottom row of teeth will be in shadow. So now I'm going to shade in the lips. When shading in lips, at the very front, you always have a light highlight. So you can see I'm just sort of drawing in my light highlight there. Then I come in from the other side, and there's my light highlight there as well. That doesn't mean I'm going to leave that spot white, but that's going to be a lot lighter than any other part of his lips. And that goes the same for the top lip. Since he's smiling, the top lip is very narrow, so it's not going to be as noticeable as the bottom lip. As you can see, I've blended down the bottom lip, and I blended that highlight in, but you can definitely still see that there is a light highlight there. Always keep an eye on your shadows. Draw your shadows, not your outlines. As you can see, I'm just doing little touch-ups here and there. Never feel that you can't do touch-ups to add shading or take shading out. So I'm just taking my gum eraser and I'm just making the shadows a little bit lighter on his teeth because I don't want them to look like I've drawn each tooth individually. There you have his mouth, and now I'm very happy with the result of that. Now I'm erasing my guidelines for his mouth and the rest of the central guideline. And from there I'm going to continue on with my shading. I'm giving him his smile lines. And the shading in the picture showed me that he has shading around this side of his jaw. And he has rounded cheeks, so I'm adding that in to give that more depth and more of a 3D feel. Make sure you use your mat so that you don't smudge parts of your drawing that you've already finished. Now I'm going to add in his eyebrows. And with the eyebrows, I draw a general shape, and then I'll just tick in the strands of hair, adding more short little lines where it's darker, because eyebrows aren't uniform in shape or in color. I'm just penciling in where I have his hair coming down so that I know where to leave out the blocks of the eyebrows, where his hair is down. And then I put in his second eyebrow. As you can see, the face is coming together quite nicely. I'm using a darker pencil to add more variation to the hairs of the eyebrow as well. And I'm quite happy with how that is looking.
If you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned to my channel because we will be doing more tutorials with Laura in the future.